Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. Welcome to Essential Issues Weekly, where I talk about DC Comics 1 week, well, usually, after their release on the Ultra tier of the DC Universe Infinite subscription service. In each installment, I pick an assortment of comics to talk about as a DC fan, and also explore what, if anything, they have to say about the essential issues of real life. Now, warning, full spoilers for everything that I talk about. Be aware, this is your first and only warning that many spoilers lie ahead. All right, for the second week in a row, and to finish up this process, I am catching up on comics that I haven't talked about as a result of being, away for about a month off grid. And so this week I'm getting finally caught up to where we are all through January. So I'm going to look at comics originally released on the Ultra tier, well, in the range of January 2nd through the 16th of 2024, but actually the ones I picked all ended up being from the 16th. First from that group, I've chosen Batman, Superman, World's Finest, number 22, and this has been kind of an interesting novelty of a story to read because it's written by Mark Waid, who also wrote the very famous Alex Ross painted story Kingdom Come way back in the day. I want to say like early or mid 90s or something like that. And I am not a huge fan of that story, mostly because the novelty of Alex Ross's painting kind of wore off to me. I think that I really like the more dynamic, less realistic look for comic book heroes. And so coming back to it and exploring the origins of the character Magog, who is the guy with the big brass horns, if you don't quite remember that name. Mark Waid has basically been revisiting this kind of story thread that he wrote and creating an origin for Magog, and suggests that he is from a parallel universe where he has superpowers, but he has a career for a while as a superhero named Thunderman, and he starts actually training under Superman in the early days of Superman, because the World's Finest comic, if you didn't know, is supposed to take place in the relatively early days of Batman and Superman's careers, and so what this story arc is doing is kind of establishing how they knew this guy from a long time ago, and kind of end up going on universe traveling adventures, and eventually establish, as we're caught up to the story now in issue 22, that the Kingdom Come universe is actually a parallel reality. It is not a possible future, really, for the mainstream DC universe. It is a parallel reality. And so they are kind of stuck in that reality now and dealing with Thunderman, who started out as, really a good kid, but with maybe some really violent tendencies that they were trying to ease him down from, but just unsuccessfully. And now it's finally starting to come to a head. As I said, I've enjoyed this story a little bit as a novelty, just because the Kingdom Come story that it's based on is so well known, but I'm not really super invested in that original story, and them kind of jumping around to parallel realities. I'm more interested in these stories about the early days of Batman and Superman being in the mainstream DC universe, because then I think that they have more going on that could reflect on the current state of the DC universe that I'm actually invested in than in the parallel reality that they're kind of spending a good amount of time in here. And on top of that, the moment in issue 22 where Thunderman is made into Magog by Gog, this kind of evil influencer and mentor to him, kind of like the Emperor to Darth Vader. He just kind of in one panel turns his costume into the well-known Magog costume. It feels, after kind of all the build-up, it somehow feels too abrupt. And I'm not sure exactly what I would have wanted differently, but it feels a little bit abrupt and a little bit forced, a little bit artificial to go from the very different, colorful costume that Thunderman had to this brass, shirtless, kind of a Magog costume. So I don't know really what I think of it, but it looks like the story is coming to a head, and I'm at least interested in where it seems to be going, mainly because I'm a fan of Darkseid as a villain, and the tease near the end of this issue is that Gog is preparing to use Magog and his forces that he's gathering, and kind of like the way he's kind of corrupting all the heroes of his world, to have an all-out war on the planet Apocalypse. And so there's kind of like a tease image, and I'm like, okay, well, hey, I'm pretty much game for any kind of story where Darkseid is the villain. So I will at least, I think, be interested to see how this story closes out, even though I've not been super invested in it. Next up is Batman Off-World #2. Now, I didn't talk about #1 because I thought, well, I don't know if I'm really going to end up talking about this series. It's a mini-series. I'm not sure if it's going to go 6 issues or more. But it likewise takes place in the early years of Batman, and it basically represents his first adventures off into space. Conceptually, on paper, I'd be like this, I'm not interested in this at all. I tend to be interested in really ground level Batman stories. But what they do with this story is interesting. It just kind of shows how Batman learns to survive and adapt when he is totally not prepared to be fighting against aliens. And so we know that part of Batman's backstory is that he traveled the world learning from the best martial arts experts so that he could fight crime in Gotham City. But this is kind of like being shown to us, I think, represented to us as a sort of second round of training that prepared Batman for threats in the wider DC universe, threats that he would go up against with the Justice League eventually, for example. And so it's neat to see him kind of cutting his teeth and learning, okay, how do I fight these aliens that are like almost Kryptonian strong and have weird alien martial arts that I'm not familiar with. He's learning all this stuff and figuring out how to take down these totally alien and weird types of opponents. And I think it's interesting so far. Also of interest is the way that they build up affection that the reader is meant to feel for a robot named, I think, Punchbot. I can't remember if that's his name or not. But basically, when Batman is kind of like in a prison cell or something like that, he ends up seeing this Punchbot that's supposed to help train him to like kill, the bad enemies and stuff like that. Well, he kind of seems to get invested relationally in this. Well, not so. We don't say, it's not that we see Batman so much investing in it, but the robot is written in such a sweet, endearing kind of C-3PO style of character that we as readers, I think, are meant to kind of feel something for him. And this device or trope has been used for a long time, going back to Short Circuit and, of course, the Star Wars movies. But what's interesting to me is in this moment where Batman has an opportunity to escape and things are kind of like, all hell is breaking loose, as it were. He goes back because he says, I'm out here to do such and such, but I'm not going to lose myself along the way. And I think that's meant to tell us I'm not going to lose caring about people and valuing people. And so that's why he goes back to save the robot. And the Tamaranian alien that's with him says, I don't believe it. The idiot's going back for a damned robot, excuse my language. And I almost kind of felt the same thing. I was like, yeah, what is going on here, And I think this is just symptomatic, again, of the interesting conversations that are going to increasingly take place about the potential for, robots and AI to be considered persons and to have worth as persons. Right now, they're just being played around with in fiction here. I would believe that this could be a stand-in for to represent something else. It's not really that the writer here is making a strong statement about the potential personhood of AI, but maybe something about Batman caring for even the ones that no one else sees any reason to care about, and I can accept it as a metaphor for that, but it still rings a little bit weird to me. If I try to dissect it too much, I'm like, okay, well, why is Batman, is this just evidence that Batman is a naturalist, an atheist? Maybe. I'd prefer to think that he's not an idiot. So maybe that's the better way to go. Anyway, moving on then finally to Wonder Woman #4, which has been interesting and exploring the idea of Wonder Woman as a ambassador for peace and for the Amazons in a time when Amazons are really under fire because one of them apparently murdered a bunch of people. And so the Amazons have been deported from the United States. And of course, as I talked about issue 3 last time, the villain of the story kind of manipulated a soldier who had an encounter with Wonder Woman into believing that that encounter had so damaged him emotionally and mentally that he should take his own life, which he did, and left a suicide note. And I suspected that we were going to see the fallout of that in this issue, which we are. The news is reporting on it, and one anchor says, Delgado, the man who committed suicide, goes on to say that the battle against Wonder Woman, and we quote here, quote, robbed me of the dignity of my gender, which is a gift of God, unquote. So again, they're continuing to play with, it wasn't just an accident, I don't think, because they're emphasizing it again here. Okay, we're really getting into kind of gender politics here, but what exactly the writer is saying, what stance they're taking, I'm still finding it hard to kind of parse through, and that's also the case with another part of this issue. There's a lot of different threads that are being kind of covered in this issue of Wonder Woman, and most of them do something to continue developing the story of the state of Amazons and the U.S. government and stuff. But there is what feels like a bit of a detour here, and I'm willing to allow that maybe it'll be developed in a way that I don't expect in future issues. But right now, it feels like a bit of a detour that Wonder Woman takes to visit a sick child who has cancer, seems to be terminally diagnosed. And so it's kind of like I don't know if they use the phrase make a wish, but it seems like it was that she's visiting this child as part of a make a wish type of scenario. And so this child gets to spend a day with Wonder Woman. So she takes this young boy in her invisible jet, and we cut back and forth to them throughout the issue, and she just shows him the fun of her powers and stuff, and takes him to visit even Themyscira, even though there's a little bit of tension there with the Amazons as they arrive there. And so it's really this kind of heartwarming thing that Wonder Woman is doing for this boy in just a horrible and very, it's a very grounded, real-world type of scenario. And then this conversation takes a turn to this young boy not just having kind of cancer and the struggle of cancer as his main kind of like challenge, his main emotional kind of struggle that he's going through. But it shifts to a different kind of topic, and you have to, unfortunately, read between the lines a little bit, and this is an example of, I wish that writers would just be a little bit more clear. But I think maybe there is either some timidness there, because they don't want to be too controversial, or maybe they just don't want to deal with the critical evaluation of their words if they were more clear about their view and what they were attempting to say here. But Wonder Woman and this boy are sitting on a cliff after a day of lots of fun, and this boy says, Wonder Woman, I think there's something wrong with me. And she says, what is this? Do you need to go to a hospital? And he says, no, it's not. I had so much fun today, the best time, and this was all I wanted. And I think I'm supposed to, I don't think this should be what I like. And she says, well, I'm glad you had fun. I wish I could give you more. You are a good boy. You deserve so much more. And he says, no, it's not that. It's my dad and the other kids. I like this so much. And shouldn't I like Superman and Batman and, I don't know, baseball and normal stuff for a boy? Why is this good? So in other words, this boy is seeing something wrong with the fact that his Make-A-Wish fantasy was to spend the day with Wonder Woman and doing all these fun things instead of wanting to be with Superman or Batman and doing baseball stuff. So he's seeing, if I'm reading between the lines here, he's seeing those as the more masculine things and spending a day with Wonder Woman as a more feminine thing. And he's feeling like that the message he gets from the world around him is that there's something wrong with that. And then he goes on to a much more philosophical and emotional level. Is it because I'm sick, he says, inside, sick inside? And is that why is that why God made me sick? And I think this is a sentiment that is that has been brought up in the past when it comes to the issue of homosexuality. And I remember from like newsreels and news from like the 80s and 90s when the AIDS epidemic was a real big problem. There was unfortunately a lot of nastiness coming from some Christian voices saying that this is God's judgment on them for embracing that life, and so I think that like some questions about like feeling cursed by God are part of this conversation, part of this struggle, whether they're coming from someone who is experiencing same-sex attraction or someone who is being critical of those who are experiencing and engaging with those inclinations. So I don't think I'm unreasonable to suspect that there is something of that topic that is intended to be addressed here. So the question of the boy is, did God make me sick because I have this bent toward enjoying more feminine things instead of more masculine things? One woman says, "Oh, Jack, no, my darling boy, there is nothing wrong with you." And I would agree. There's nothing wrong with a boy enjoying things that would normally be associated with girls. Just because some things are statistically associated with girls or boys doesn't mean that there's something wrong if you don't fall into that statistic. At the same time, and I think this is something that would be good for a number of people to hear and understand, I don't think that those statistical variances of enjoying things that are typically associated with women mean that you are in some way female in gender, or that you in some way ought to be attracted to men instead of attracted to women. I don't think enjoying those kinds of things that are outside of your kind of normal statistical framework are necessarily saying anything about gender or sexuality. I can't tell you how many ways my wife and I are statistically different, and how she tends to do and be wired to do things that men typically are wired to do and driven to do, and I tend to line up in a number of ways with what is true statistically of women. But anyway, again, I'm having to kind of read into things, and it would be easy for the writer to say, "Oh, no, I didn't intend that," whether or not that's true or not. They could say that. And so there's not much point in digging too deep into this. Certainly not any point in getting, really fired up about it, but it just leaves me kind of wondering. But Wonder Woman then goes on to talk about not God, but the gods. And this is another place where I'm trying to figure out, okay, is the writer using the gods that in the DC universe are like visible and people have seen them? They are, there's no question that they exist, these gods from Olympus and stuff, Is she using them? Is she just talking about them as characters in the DC universe? Or is she talking about them and the writer is using this as a metaphor to talk about sentiments that people have toward God or the higher power that they're wondering, might exist? But she goes on to say, "I do not understand the gods. Though I have met them and fought them and worshipped them, their desires remain a mystery. Their definitions of sin and tribute seem constantly, inevitably to change. Just grass thrown in the wind, it seems to me. They honor the weak one moment, the next they celebrate the strong. Every commandment they hand down, they break themselves before we even get a chance to try. To be honest, I think they are fools, and all their pomp and thunder is just a cloak they wear to hide their obvious folly. At times when I look at them, I see right through it, and I just start laughing, and they look at me and wonder why. You see, they made us in their image. This is the key to it all. They shaped us from clay, yes, but their model was themselves. This world is a labyrinth. We are lost in it. And so too are the gods." So she is portraying this very flawed view of the gods, which is absolutely appropriate both for the comic book version of these gods and the historical version of the polytheistic gods of various religions in the world, that they are petty and they are very flawed and very much like humans. And so I think somewhere along the way, people tend to make the same assumption about Yahweh, the God revealed in the Tanakh, the Old Testament, and the New Testament. But so many times throughout Scripture, we see that God is not like humans. He is not petty. But at a surface, without really understanding context and factoring in the different things that are important to factor in, people can look at statements in Scripture, activities, actions, judgments of God in Scripture, and just judge him as being flawed and petty and things like that. And so I'm wondering if those types of sentiments are kind of being expressed using the Greek gods here as a parallel. I don't know. Again, dang it, I'd really just wish the writers would often come out and be more clear about what it is they're saying. Wonder Woman, in light of this, goes on to say, all of which means, Jack, though we struggle and question, there are no answers to be found in the heavens. In other words, I think no answers to be found from the gods. We must instead seek our peace here, with each other, within each other. And that strikes me as a pretty humanistic, arguably atheistic kind of sentiment. There is no objective meaning higher than us, outside of us. We just have to come up with meaning ourselves, which I guess she decides that peace is what she is going to value, peace with each other, within each other. I'm not sure exactly what she means by that, but it's very much all we have is us. We just got to figure out what we want to do, what we want the world to mean, what we want the world to be about. That's the impression. Again, it's not being said clearly. And so I could be wrong about the intent there, but that's the impression I'm getting is at least the sentiment behind this specific thing that Wonder Woman is saying, or the underlying worldview from which this sentiment, I should say, springs out. She goes on to say, who you are, what defines you, and then she doesn't finish that sentence. She kind of goes on a rabbit trail and says, I have traveled far and wide, I have warred with the angels and supped with the devils, I have seen universes birthed into my hands, and men dying with my name fumbling from their lips. So she's saying, for context for what I'm about to say, I've seen a lot. And so she's kind of indirectly saying, I have this elevated place of knowledge from which I can give you some wisdom here. I have perspective that other people don't have, so what I'm about to share is actually worth more than what other people might share because of what I've experienced, because of what I have seen. So I'm about to say something that is trustworthy in light of having seen so much more of the universe than most people see. She says, I have known cruelty and I have known love, and I choose love. And of course, this is from a Christian standpoint, a valuable thing to say. It's objectively true, and I say that because we have an objective standard outside and above us, as opposed to just subjectively true, which is what Wonder Woman was kind of wanting to base her view on, it seems, just kind of like us figuring out amongst ourselves what we want to do. Let's have peace, let's have love. And love is a very big word in conversations when it comes to gender and sexuality and stuff. But we don't really get into the definition of love and where that definition comes from, if there is an objective definition of love, or if we're just coming up with our own definition of things. And so ultimately these conversations are most productive if we can find a way back to that idea of, like, how are we getting our definition of love? Is there an objective source of love and that defines these virtues, these morals, these values for us? That's where we need to gently try and find our way back to, I think, in these kinds of conversations, because absolutely love is an important value, but we gotta talk about and define our terms. So anyway, philosophically, there's a number of things that are being flirted with that unfortunately are not truly brought to the surface so that we can truly evaluate them. I'm doing a lot of speculating here. And that's really, why I'm wearing the green ring today. As I said last time, I recently got a set of all of the spectrum of lantern rings, and so as a dumb gimmick, I'm going to, I think, wear a different one every week that corresponds in some way to what's on my mind in terms of my emotions or my summary feelings. Now, actually, I, since the very beginning, have argued that will actually doesn't belong on an emotional spectrum. Will, if anything, is the overcoming of emotion. It is choice in the face of emotions that might sway us one way or the other. And that's kind of what I'm feeling right now. It's like, when I read stories like this that seem to be wanting to preach something but are being indirect and imprecise and are dancing around so that we can't properly bring these things to the surface and talk about them, I can find that a little bit frustrating. I definitely want to avoid the red ring of anger in this situation and make assumptions and get grumpy and blah, blah, they're preaching to me, blah, 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 woke or whatever. But instead, I kind of see the green ring as like, okay, let's will ourselves to look at the nuance here, to be discerning, to not be led around by emotions here, especially when it comes to these kinds of controversial issues. When people are bringing these issues to the surface, even if they're doing it angrily, passionately, judgmentally, there is a heart cry that I think as Christians it's important for us to try and get to the bottom of. What is the heart cry here? And I think the heart cry is, I want to be loved. I want people to have understanding and compassion. I want to be valued. And, I think that the way that people seek that out can be very harmful to themselves and to others, and can involve a lot of nasty bickering and rhetoric and all kinds of stuff that we certainly do not want to enter into as Christians. And so I think instead what I want to do is like, okay, let me will myself to look for the nuance here, look for the points that I can agree with, that I've said as I've looked at this issue of Wonder Woman. I can agree that love is absolutely important. And there's some other things here, depending on what they mean, that I'm like, yes, I can be on board with that. So I think a more nuanced kind of approach to that, and willing ourselves to discern our way through and figure out, okay, how does this inform me that I should approach maybe some conversations with people that I differ with as those opportunities arise? And how can I do that in a loving, tactful, thoughtful way that honors Christ and the truth? So anyway, yeah, those are, I guess, kind of my summary thoughts on how I'm feeling about Wonder Woman. Which of these books has gotten your attention? Batman, Superman, Batman Off-World, Wonder Woman #4, any others in January that have gotten your attention so far? I'd love to get your thoughts and reactions, as always, in the comments below. Remember to check out christiangeekcentral.com for tons more content. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.